Do you have a bunch of thrift store finds, Dollar Tree purchases, and DIY supplies, but struggle knowing what to do with them? Well, let me challenge you to combine them. When you combine two or three different and ordinary items, you can create something that is beautiful and totally unique. Don't believe me? Well, in today's video, I'll be doing just that, combining new with old, Dollar Tree with vintage to create some charming cottage decor that is totally one of a kind. I think you'll be surprised at how well this combining hack works. So let's get started.
Let's start by combining two seemingly incompatible items, a Dollar Tree plant pot and a vintage doily. I added a few rocks in the bottom of a small terracotta pot to weigh it down, and then I added some stuffing. I used some old pom-poms for my stuffing. I took a small piece of white felt and wrapped it around some stuffing to create a ball, hot gluing the felt down to hold it in place. Then I pushed the ball into the terracotta pot and hot glued the ball to the inside of the pot. I thought about covering the felt with a vintage handkerchief, but ultimately I decided to put a flower pattern from an old doily over the felt. I pushed the edges of the doily down into the pot and hot glued it in place. It looked so cute, so I decided to add a bit of greenery and some small coordinating paper flowers from Dollar Tree. Thinking I was done, I added a few straight pins, but then I remembered I had some ribbon that looks like small leaves, so I hot glued a piece of that ribbon around the top of the pot. This next combination project was inspired by something my friend Julie bought in a recent video on her channel, Julie Thrifts. Using my Cricut machine, I cut out a simple flower and house shape from a piece of poster board. Then I centered the shape and cut out the poster board to fit inside some picture frames from my stash. I sprayed the back of the poster board with some spray adhesive and then attached it to a piece of vintage fabric. Then I just put both pieces inside my picture frame. I repeated the process with the flower shape, this time attaching the poster board to a piece of fabric cut from a vintage tablecloth. When I put the poster board into this frame, I noticed that a piece of the frame had broken off. To fix it, I knocked off the sharp edges with my hammer and then sanded it smooth. To disguise the repair, I repainted the frame with some pink acrylic paint that I had on hand. The pink was a little bright, so to tone it down, I applied some white wax, brushing it on and wiping away the excess.
A few months ago, a company called Magic Mind reached out and wanted to know if I would like to try their productivity drink. Well, I am a huge skeptic of products like that, but I figured, what could it hurt to give it a try? Well, let me tell you, I was completely surprised. From the very first time I used it, I could feel a difference. I felt more energetic, more focused, maybe even more creative. And I didn't get that jittery feeling that I get from coffee and traditional energy drinks. How does it work? Well, it contains nootropics and L-theanine from matcha, which help to promote sustained energy. and it contains a mixture of a bunch of other natural ingredients whose names I can't pronounce, so I'll just put them on the screen. I'll be honest, it doesn't taste great, but it's not awful. And since it comes in 2-ounce shots, I just swig it down all at once in the morning. If you'd like to try Magic Mind, click on the link in the description box below and use the code COTTAGE to get up to 56% off your first order. I truly love this stuff, so I'll be using my own code to order myself some more.
I had an old piece of green and white chippy wood that I thought would look so cute combined with some birdhouses. So I found 3 small thrift store birdhouses in my stash and gave them a fresh coat of paint. Then, to dress up the birdhouses, I applied a butterfly transfer from IOD to the front of each house. The images didn't transfer as perfectly as I would have liked, so I just went over them with a sanding block to distress them and make it look intentional. There was a missing cutout piece on the front of the piece of wood, which I painted green. Then I used Mod Podge to adhere the poster board letters that were left over from the previous project that spell out home. Next, I measured and drilled 3 evenly spaced holes in the middle of the piece of wood. I drilled the holes just the right size for a small dowel rod that I had on hand and had painted green. I cut the dowel rod into 3 small pieces. Then I brushed some wood glue on the end of each piece and in each of the holes, and then hammered the dowel rods in place. The dowel rods were a little too long, so I used my miter shears to cut them to the desired length. I sanded them smooth and then touched up the green paint. Now to attach the birdhouses. One of the birdhouses was on a little dowel rod, so I drilled a hole along the top of the piece of wood and then inserted the dowel rod into the hole with a little hot glue. The other 2 houses and a little terracotta bird that I decided to use were all flat on the bottom, so I could just hot glue them to the top of the wood. And as a finishing touch, I hot glued on the top portion of a transparent Dollar Tree butterfly sticker. I like the shape of these new Dollar Tree candlesticks, but they are so flimsy. So let's build one up by combining it with a couple of thrift store items. To add weight to the base, I super glued it to a heavy drink coaster. And then to dress it up, I super glued this metal flower thingy to the top. I think it might be a candle holder too. Then, to unite the 3 separate pieces, I gave it a coat of white chalk paint. While I was painting, I remembered that I wanted to try this new product called Salt Wash that I had purchased from my friend Sammy from her website, Unicorn Dust Designs. It's supposed to give your projects an authentic, old, crusty appearance. So once my first coat of paint was dry, I went ahead and mixed some salt wash into some old white chalk paint and then brushed it over the candlestick. I've mixed real salt into paint before, and this was completely different and so much better. While the salt wash dried, I made a little bird's nest using a miniature grapevine wreath and some sheet moss. I finished off the nest with some Spanish moss, a little bird from Dollar Tree, and some tiny greenery. And then I covered it all with a tiny cloche that I had in my stash. And finally, I wrapped a little faux vine around the knob at the top of the cloche. Even though I reused most of the wood from the drawers in last week's dresser makeover, I still had quite a bit left. So I cut some of it into little rectangles approximately 2 inches wide by 3 inches long. Then I printed out several different vintage seed packet images on regular copy paper in sizes to fit on the wood rectangles. To adhere the images to the wood, I applied a light, even coat of Mod Podge both to the piece of wood and to the back of the piece of paper, smoothing out any wrinkles with my fingers and a paper towel. When the Mod Podge was dry, I used a utility knife to cut off any extra paper around the edges and sanded all the edges with 220 grit sandpaper. Then I applied a top coat of Mod Podge and let that dry. Once the second coat was dry, I drilled a small hole in the top center of each block of wood and screwed in a small eye hook. These seed packets are cute on their own, but now let's string them on a piece of twine and combine them with some vintage wood spools. I placed one spool on either side of my 7 seed packet blocks. I decided that I would tie the wood blocks to the twine to keep them from sliding around. Because I wanted a simple, rustic look, I ripped a couple strips of fabric off of an old sheet and stuck them in my morning cup of coffee. I let them soak for about 15 minutes and then wrung them out and let them dry. I wanted the ribbon to look old, in keeping with the vintage seed packets. Once they were dry, I cut them into smaller strips and ran them through the eye hooks and tightened them around the twine. I thought the spools looked a little plain, so I cut a few small pieces of ribbon and hot glued them around each spool. I think clocks are lovely on their own, but let's see what happens when we combine a thrift store clock with an old picture frame. First, I unscrewed and removed the clock face, and then I hammered out the 2 small wood brackets that the face had been attached to. I found a pretty frame in my stash that was already missing its glass and back. I decided to use my jigsaw to cut the clock opening to the same size as the inner part of the frame. Unfortunately, due to the side details on the clock, I wasn't able to cut out an opening as neatly as I would have liked. Next, I gave the clock a couple coats of an off-white chalk paint, and to get into all the nooks and crannies, I spray painted the picture frame with some white Zinsser primer. Even though the frame was plastic, I used my brad nailer to attach it to the front of the clock. Since I had some salt wash left from the candlestick project, I just went ahead and brushed some of that on the frame to give it a more aged appearance. Then I painted the frame with the same off-white chalk paint to match the clock, and when the paint was dry, I distressed the clock and the frame with some sandpaper, and then I applied a coat of clear wax to seal and protect the paint. Now to add something inside the clock. This clock is fairly deep and would have had room to hold a small live potted plant, which I think would look adorable. But since I'll probably sell this, I decided to add faux greenery. I hot glued some styrofoam to the base and then stuck in some faux vines. I used some floral pins to attach a bird's nest to the styrofoam and then hot glued a ceramic bird inside the nest. Then I hot glued some sheet moss to cover the styrofoam. This clock was missing its back when I bought it, so I printed out a pretty landscape image on cardstock and attached it to a piece of cardboard with spray adhesive. I cut the cardboard to fit exactly into the opening on the back of the clock, so I was able to just pop it in and use the existing tabs to hold it in place. I love how this turned out. I may have to keep this one for myself. Now let's see what we can create by combining the leftover clock face with some other things I have on hand. First, I took the clock face apart and used the paper insert as a pattern to cut out a piece of fabric from a 1980s cloth calendar. The paper clock face had double stick tape on the back, so I just adhered it to the fabric and then applied hot glue to the back of the paper to reattach it to the plastic frame. The beauty of using a clock face is the extra space to add small embellishments inside. So I hot glued a piece of greenery, a little bit of Spanish moss, and a couple tiny bird eggs to the fabric. Then I reattached the glass and rim and painted the rim with some green chalk paint. To create a way to display the clock, I decided to attach the clock face to a Dollar Tree house frame. I used glue stick to adhere a piece of coordinating scrapbook paper to the back of the house. Because these houses are not made from real wood, the front edges look really cheap. So to disguise them, I attached some vintage lace. I used fabric glue rather than hot glue because the lace was quite thin and delicate. To create a flat surface, I cut off the little plastic pieces protruding on the back of the clock and then hot glued the clock into the house frame. As a finishing touch, I hot glued a Dollar Tree butterfly to the clock. I had a small piece of the peel and stick William Morris wallpaper that I used in last week's dresser makeover and decided to combine it with a square wicker basket that I just recently picked up at the thrift store. I measured out an inch from my line on all four sides and then cut out this slightly larger square of cardboard. Next, using a utility knife, I carefully cut along the pencil lines, making sure to cut through just the top layer of the cardboard and not all the way through. But I did cut and remove the corner squares so that the sides would fold up easier. Next, I used brown packing tape to tape the four sides together to create a lid for my wicker box. Then I wrapped the peel and stick wallpaper around the box lid to make it pretty. To dress it up even more, I hot glued some lace trim around the edges of the box lid. To create a handle for the lid, I painted a ceramic bird with some cashew-colored chalk paint. And when the paint was dry, I inserted a small piece of dowel rod into the opening in the bottom of the bird. Next, I made a hole in the center of the lid and pushed a screw through that hole. And then I screwed into the dowel rod that I had put inside the bird. I picked up this ceramic nautical bell at Dollar Tree, and I think it's pretty cute. But since I don't live anywhere near the ocean, I'm going to combine it with an old spindle and make it more my style. To begin, I gave it a couple coats of white chalk paint to cover up the nautical design. Then I used a ceramic drill bit to make the hole at the top of the bell a little larger so that my spindle would fit inside. A couple small pieces of ceramic chipped off, but I'll fix that later. For now, I went ahead and used some clear Gorilla Glue to attach the end of my spindle inside the hole. To add a design to the bell, I decided to just use an IOD rub-on transfer. I used a little sandpaper along the edges of the transfer to give it a more aged appearance. Then I used Gorilla Glue to attach a small ceramic bird to the top of the bell, which I had hoped would disguise the chips in the ceramic, but I still needed to repair it with a little spackle. I brushed on a dab of antiquing wax to darken the cut mark at the top of the spindle. Once the spackle was dry, I sanded it a bit and touched up the paint, and the chips were completely disguised. I drilled a small hole at the top of the spindle and tied on a little ribbon. It's much more my style now. This next combination of items is a project that you can do anytime to quickly create some seasonal decor. Fill a cute basket with some styrofoam. Make sure the styrofoam fits snugly so that you don't need to use any hot glue. The basket I'm using has a thermal lining, so I want to be able to reuse it in the future. Now you're going to add just 5 things to your basket. Number 1, add some tall flowers on one side of the basket. Number 2, add some droopy greenery next to the tall flowers. Number 3, add some filler greenery, although you may want to save this step for last. Number 4, add a fabric element on the side opposite the tall flowers. I usually use a bow, but this time I'm using a small table runner. And number 5, add an unexpected element like this ceramic teapot. If you enjoyed these combination hack projects, I'd love to hear your suggestions for items you'd like to see me combine in a future video.
I forgot to tell you, Magic Mind comes with a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you'd like to give it a try, just click on the link in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching today, and I hope to see you next week. Bye-bye for now.
And if you like cottage decor, here's another video I think you may enjoy.